The world has collapsed into war, and nuclear powers lost control of burning borders spreading across continents. Attacks and invasions inside NATO countries already dominate daily life, and no one doubts it anymore. The conflict that began between Russia and Ukraine has become a global powder keg. On one side, nuclear powers test their limits. On the other, Europe arms itself like in World War II, while fear grows each day. Russia increased its attacks, and Ukraine responded in kind using unmanned aircraft and NATO missiles. Meanwhile, the Western alliance remains on alert due to constant Russian incursions, sabotage, and sanctions that reignite a direct confrontation between Moscow, London, and Washington. Diplomacy is dead, while tanks and missiles erase European cities within hours, leaving nations gasping for survival. Diplomacy has weakened and given way to an arms race and economic punishment. While the West tries to financially strangle Moscow, millions of civilians live surrounded by explosions. Peace attempts seem more distant each day, and the conflict only grows stronger. Europe is experiencing its most tense moment since the Cold War. The balance between strength and dialogue has practically disappeared, and the risk of total war is more real than ever. Even London is burning after a Russian attack, just hours after Estonia and Lithuania were invaded. Humanity watches powerless as the planet dives into total war and fear consumes every corner of Earth. So I ask you this, are we living the last weeks of peace? Do you believe our lives will radically change, with much of the world forced to live in bunkers to avoid nuclear radiation? How do you see the moment we're living through? Just a reminder, this report is based on news from Sky News, The New York Times, BBC, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Sputnik, RT News, and Telegram. But before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription means a lot and helps you stay updated on every story about the raging nations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up to help this project grow even more. Russia claims it captured 3 villages in Donetsk, but Kyiv insists the fighting remains intense. Russian tanks and artillery push forward, trying to break Ukrainian lines, while local troops attempt to contain the siege. Control of supply routes has become a top priority for both sides. Kyiv's response came in the form of drones flying over Russian refineries. Explosions hit fuel depots in Kursk and Ryazan, forcing Moscow to strengthen its air defenses with S-400 systems. The fires prove that Russian territory is also vulnerable. A Ukrainian drone reached the Moscow region and injured 5 people before being intercepted. It was the closest attack to Russia's heart this month. The message is clear. Ukraine can now hit strategic targets far beyond the front lines. Russian missiles struck civilian areas in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, killing 6 people, including 2 children. Kyiv called it revenge for the bombings on Russian soil. The UN called for a ceasefire, but bombs keep falling every day. Ukraine stated that Storm Shadow missiles, supplied by the United Kingdom, destroyed a gunpowder factory in Bryansk. Moscow confirmed the strike but tried to downplay the damage. Behind the scenes, fear grows that new coordinated offensives are about to begin. Eastern Europe turned to ruins, each explosion marking the dawn of an age where no one survives. Satellite images show columns of Russian tanks approaching Donbass supported by K-52 helicopters and Su-35 jets. Russia has been using Fab 500 glide bombs capable of creating massive craters to break Ukrainian defenses and advance village by village. Kyiv announced the arrival of new domestically made kamikaze drones, equipped with 50-kilogram warheads and an 80-kilometer range. The government said production will increase this year, betting on technological warfare to balance the fight. Moscow reacted by installing Panzer S-1 batteries around the capital and Leningrad. According to Russia's Ministry of Defense, 34 Ukrainian drones were shot down in a single day. Russia called the attacks technological extremism and vowed tougher responses. On the front line, the scene is total destruction. Artillery battles continue non-stop, with videos showing Russian howitzers firing sequence after sequence. Neither side shows signs of retreating. Every meter gained has cost dozens of lives and entire cities left in ruins. Everything indicates that the next few hours may bring new combined attacks on Russian strategic structures. Kyiv promises to respond proportionally, while Moscow threatens unprecedented retaliation. The world holds its breath waiting for the next move. Tanks roll, missiles roar, and Europe's soil becomes an extermination ground before a helpless global audience. In the United Kingdom, 5 men were convicted for leaving London under fire after hitting a Ukrainian company in the city. Authorities say the crime was funded by groups linked to Russian intelligence. The news raised alarms that attacks are spreading across Europe. Hours later, new arrests revealed another similar attack, also targeting companies providing military services to Ukraine. British police are investigating a spy network that may be operating under direct command from Moscow. NATO confirmed that fighters were scrambled after Russian planes entered Lithuanian airspace. The flight lasted only seconds, but it was enough to trigger maximum alert. The alliance called it a deliberate provocation and reinforced surveillance over the Baltic. The president of Lithuania said Russian jets ignored all warnings and flew over the country for almost 20 seconds. He urged NATO to increase the number of ready aircraft, saying Moscow is testing the alliance's patience. In Estonia, the government reported new suspicious flights and cyber attacks from hackers linked to the Kremlin. The country says it has benefited from defense and intelligence contracts but fears the Russian escalation could turn the Baltic into the next direct conflict zone. Spies, hackers, and jets cross borders non-stop, making it impossible to tell espionage from full-scale warfare. After the attacks in London, the British government reinforced security at strategic facilities and raised the alert level. Intelligence services believe Moscow is behind a hybrid campaign mixing sabotage, espionage, and information manipulation. NATO responded with a large military movement involving F-35, Eurofighter, and Gripen jets flying over the Baltic and Poland. The training included missile interception and air defense simulations, making it clear that any Russian violation will be met immediately. Military analysts noted that incidents between Russia and NATO have doubled in recent weeks. The United States sent more troops to bases in Romania and Latvia in an effort to contain Russian advances and show that the alliance will not back down from provocations. Lithuania's parliament passed a new law allowing the downing of foreign drones crossing national airspace. The measure is seen as an urgent response to the threat of hybrid attacks combining espionage, sabotage, and electronic warfare. Now, the expectation is that new air and cyber provocations may happen at any moment. Tension between Moscow and NATO has reached a point where any mistake could trigger real escalation. The fear is that a collision or misunderstanding could turn into open war. London, Warsaw, and Vilnius stand on red alert, one mistake away from a conflict that ends civilization. New nighttime attacks once again hit cities in eastern and southern Ukraine. Russian missiles and drones struck residential areas, while Moscow accuses Kyiv of attacking regions near the border. The population lives under constant sirens and fear that has become routine. Russia claimed to have shot down more than 40 Ukrainian drones in a single day, calling it a large-scale attack. In Poland, emergency alarms went off when debris crossed the country's airspace, increasing panic along the border. Reports show that millions of Ukrainians remain trapped in combat zones without access to water, power, or medicine. The UN estimates that more than 10 million are displaced within the country, living in makeshift shelters and depending on humanitarian aid. Reports have emerged that Ukrainian prisoners are being sent to the front to replace fallen soldiers. The government claims it's a voluntary program, but human rights groups are demanding investigations. The practice has reignited criticism over the human toll of the war. Russia intensified the use of Iranian-made Shahed-136 suicide drones, capable of flying up to 2,000 kilometers with 40-kilogram warheads. Ukraine is trying to develop more effective electronic countermeasures, but its defenses are increasingly overwhelmed. Millions live among ruins without shelter, food, or hope, as human collapse spreads uncontrollably through nations. Ukraine's Patriot and Iris-T defense systems were activated overnight and managed to intercept dozens of Russian missiles and drones. Even with these successes, experts warn that the cost of such operations is rapidly draining Kyiv's military budget. European analysts say that neither new sanctions nor arms deliveries are likely to change the course of the war. The conflict has become a test of economic and psychological endurance, and the strain is already affecting governments and populations across the continent. Diplomatic sources confirm that talks between Russia and the European Union remain frozen. Brussels insists it will not negotiate while Moscow maintains its offensives, while the Kremlin accuses the West of pretending to seek peace to keep imposing sanctions. Constant destruction and nightly attacks have sparked a wave of protests in several European capitals. Thousands are calling for an end to arms shipments to Ukraine and criticizing sanctions that have increased living costs and strained the regional economy. Everything points to even more tense days ahead. Reports indicate that Russia is preparing new offensives in Donbas, while Kyiv promises to respond with long-range drones. The risk of humanitarian collapse is rising, and the international community fears the conflict could spiral out of control. Iranian drones cut the Ukrainian sky, spreading fire and despair across cities erased from the map. Europe announced a new shipment of long-range missiles to Kyiv. According to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, these weapons should expand Ukraine's strike power and reduce Russia's air advantage in occupied areas, changing the battlefield dynamic. Zelensky arrived in London for a series of meetings with King Charles and European leaders. He once again demanded more weapons and sanctions, saying that without Western support, Russia could expand its reach and threaten other European nations this year. During the meetings, Zelensky and Starmer discussed forming a European coalition to speed up the delivery of fighter jets and missiles. The United Kingdom promised to continue training Ukrainian pilots and strengthen military cooperation with NATO until the end of winter. In the British Parliament, the debate heated up. Lawmakers warned that Russian provocations in Lithuanian airspace increase the risk of direct escalation. A single miscalculation could drag all of Europe into a conflict no one could control. Experts say the war has already gone beyond regional limits. With new alliances and troop repositioning, the continent is experiencing its largest rearmament since World War II. The feeling is that Europe has entered full preparation mode for a prolonged conflict. Governments crumble, alliances rot, and Europe rises again through chaos, staring into the edge of annihilation. France, Germany, and Italy announced new military aid packages for Ukraine, including self-propelled artillery systems and precision munitions. The goal is to keep Kyiv supplied through the winter, when battle tempo usually slows, but political tension rises. NATO reaffirmed that it is not formally at war with Russia, but assured that any attack on a member will be met with force. Jens Stoltenberg made it clear that the alliance will not allow Moscow to test the limits of collective defense. The Kremlin responded with new military maneuvers near Finland, using short-range missiles to demonstrate power. Moscow accuses NATO of creating pretexts for direct intervention, and claims that the buildup of Western troops threatens its sovereignty. In Brussels, European Union defense ministers discussed how to maintain political unity amid the economic cost of war. The prolonged conflict is already wearing down several governments, and many fear that the population will lose patience with military spending. The coming weeks will be crucial. NATO is reinforcing maneuvers, Russia threatens new missile tests, and Ukraine promises counterattacks. The winter is set to be the tensest of the decade, and all of Europe holds its breath fearing the next major clash. NATO vows to strike back. Russia threatens, and missile screams replace diplomacy between fading empires. 45 countries criticized Russia for using the UN Security Council as a political stage. They say Moscow is trying to rewrite the war narrative and deceive public opinion. The Russian government responded by accusing the West of hypocrisy and diplomatic hysteria. France and Ukraine exchanged barbs after disagreements over arms deliveries. Paris called for caution, while Kyiv demanded faster action. The diplomatic tension revealed how the war is dividing even allies and weakening the narrative of unity against Moscow. The Kremlin sent a high-ranking representative to Washington shortly after Trump's new sanctions on Russian oil. The US government said the measures are irreversible and part of an offensive to cut off war funding, tightening the economic siege. Putin responded by calling the sanctions an economic aggression and promised to redirect exports to Asia. Analysts see this move as the beginning of a global dispute between Russia and the United States for control of the energy market. Joint maneuvers between the United States and the European Union in the Baltic were described by Russian analysts as a deliberate military encirclement. Tensions have risen again, reigniting fears that the war could spiral out of control and become a global conflict. Sanctions detonate like economic bombs, crushing economies and pushing entire countries toward imminent bankruptcy. The European Union approved a historic sanctions package that will gradually cut Russian liquefied natural gas imports, aiming to reach zero by 2027. It's one of the toughest measures since the invasion began and will slash billions from Moscow's revenue. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer urged allies to release 140 billion euros in frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's reconstruction. The plan divides opinions and raises fears of financial retaliation from Moscow. The proposal was blocked by 2 European Union countries, but leaders promised to revise the text and create an emergency fund using profits from frozen assets. The stalemate shows how even the European bloc struggles to maintain a united front. In the United States, Donald Trump expanded sanctions on Russian oil, targeting exports to India and China. The White House says the goal is to cut Moscow's military budget, but oil prices have already started rising, putting pressure on Western economies. Moscow responded by announcing parallel energy deals with Asian countries. Russia is betting on its partnership with China to bypass financial blockades and turn the US boycott into a new front of influence in the global energy market. The planet bleeds in silence, each political move now carrying the weight of countless condemned lives. The conflict has turned into a global power struggle mixing diplomacy, sanctions, and military force. Neither side seems willing to back down. Meanwhile, civilians remain caught in the crossfire, and the world adapts to a new international order built on pressure and fear. The borders of Eastern Europe have become the center of a war that goes far beyond geography. What's at stake now is influence, energy, and political survival. The arms race and rising tensions show that peace is becoming increasingly distant. The UN denounces constant violations of international law, but resolutions are ignored. Millions flee bombed areas while major powers keep playing one against another. The conflict has become a test of global diplomatic impotence. Every week brings new sanctions, offensives, and threats. None of the powers want to back down, and the stalemate has turned into a war of resistance and propaganda. The entire planet feels the effects of this dispute, and the energy crisis threatens to become permanent. So I ask you this, are we living the last weeks of peace? Do you believe our lives will radically change, with much of the world forced to live in bunkers to avoid nuclear radiation? How do you see the moment we're living through? Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of the video. You're awesome, and I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any updates on the raging nations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up to help this project grow even more.